I think everyone can hear me? Yeah? Okay. Thanks again for coming, everybody. My name is Casey Pendergast. I work for the New York State Department of Environmental Conservation, as well as I'm doing some graduate research at SUNY Albany on northern long-eared bats. And this was a talk, a full 40-minute talk last year, something similar to this, kind of going into the project. So I'm just going to touch briefly on our project and where we are now and what's coming up. So. Sorry. Oh. Okay, my bad. So just a real quick history for you guys. First records we have are from 1933 from this gentleman, Paul Connor. Actually did this whole fantastic little journal of all the mammals of Long Island, and that's kind of all the stuff we have, all the records we have historically of the northern long-eared bat on Long Island. There was a research project done out at Hither Hills with a very large number of individuals captured in a single evening, which was kind of unheard of and somehow just got brushed under the radar and nobody really knew about it. The importance of sharing data, that we can kind of figure this out earlier. And then also our rabies lab submissions is really all we can kind of base our population on beforehand. Okay, and then I just want to real quick jump on this. This is the white nose syndrome. If you don't know about it, it's a fungal pathogen that infects hibernating bats, wakes them up, leads to mortality and morbidity. And if you can see, the northern long-eared bat range is the green, and it pretty much perfectly matches the white nose spread. So this species is very severely affected by it. And this is what we know now. So white nose came to Albany, New York in 2006. That was the first record of it. First documented kind of on a bat in 2011, but we knew it was around before then. And down here, these bats are all completely infected with it. But what we found, which is very curious, is the bats here on Long Island, our capture rates are remaining very similar to what they were before white nose came about. Our rabies lab submissions have increased, but just we get a lot of public observations that they're here out and about, which is kind of mind-boggling because throughout its entire range, which as you saw matches the white nose distribution map, it takes about 3 years from white nose to enter a mine for this species in particular to be completely extirpated. So they're dying off in unprecedented numbers, except for here on beautiful eastern Long Island. This is actually a video we got from a resident out in the Springs region on the East End, and this is a northern long-eared bat flying in February, which is also kind of unheard of because the general hibernation period.
What did you say, 7 inch, 8 inches, maybe?
The general hibernation period is from October-ish until the end of April and May. So for a bat to be out at this time is insane. So our whole project in general, it's myself as well as another DEC employee, Samantha Hoff, who is on your schedule, is giving the talk. We are doing both through the state as well as through SUNY Albany and graduate research, studying this bat and its life history here on the island and figuring out as much as we can about it with very little pre-white nose information. So I'm going to jump through everything that we're doing, but mostly in this talk we're talking about the first two and the third. So this is Long Island, broken up for you guys with the land cover layer. Just as you can see, a lot of development, the red all the way west, which we all know, and then further east we get a lot more green, a lot more wetlands, meadowlands. So how we designed our acoustic project, which is the first part of our research, is determining the distribution of the bat on the island, since we had no information beforehand. We did a randomized study of canopy cover to see if there was any sort of relationship between canopy cover or distribution on the island to water, all these environmental factors. And we started this in 2017, and 2018 was the first 2 years of this. These are our grid squares, and we were able to detect 44% of our squares. We are detecting northern long-eared bats, which is insane because we are actually, if you can see, our study goes all the way to the Suffolk County border. So a lot of this is probably even in your own backyards. And the NAVE occupancy is saying that there's a 60% chance that we're going to detect a bat when we put out the detector for the first time. We had 4 cells that we kind of added and lost. 6 cells were lost in 2018. So there's a little bit of variation between the years. And there's a lot of factors that can explain it, but we are just putting out detectors for a few days at a time. And this just kind of, we are doing work on Martha's Vineyard and Nantucket as well. So you'll see these on here. And what this is saying is that for Long Island, if we do 1 day of surveying, we have about a 44% chance of detecting a bat if it's out there. So if we put out surveying equipment for 4 days, we have a 90% chance confidence level of determining if northerns are occupying a space. So that's huge. That's the numbers can only really be understood if you look at what our rate was upstate before white nose even hit. So you'd have to put out detectors for 20 nights upstate before white nose hit in order to have the same confidence level. So you have a huge population of these bats here that are somehow surviving white nose syndrome, and that's what we're here to figure out. So like I said, what we are doing is comparing the distribution of the bats to some environmental factors. And the one we were really curious about was this forest patch size, which actually came out completely insignificant. We didn't find any sort of relationship, which is interesting because we're detecting these bats in spaces that are forest patches that are less than 1 acre, which this is a forest obligate species. They like forests. They like to be in these large forest patches as far as all the research has ever said. But here on Long Island, you can find them in like a 1 acre backyard lot, which is incredible. So these are just a little bit of our results from the first 2 years of our study. On the 3,000 meter buffer level, which you can see here is the biggest circle. We have 3,000, 1,000, 200, and 100 meter. And the inner two circles kind of are the general local range of the species. So that's where the individuals will be in their maternity colonies and where they'll be going on a day-to-day. But they can actually travel up to the 3,000, depending on if they're finding some good bugs somewhere or whatnot. So you can see there's a huge relationship with easting. The further east you get, the more likely you are to detect a northern long-eared bat. The same with fresh water. So the further you get from fresh water, the less likely you are to detect one of these bats, which is kind of what you would expect, what you understand. And it shows us the importance of habitat. So if there is a freshwater pond on the island, which we do have quite a few of those are going to be the prime habitat locations for these bats. That's the landscape that they're using. The same true to the forest patch. As you get further from a forest patch, you're less likely to detect a bat, which makes sense as well because they live in forests and they use those. And then another curious thing is development. So as you can see, if you get to an area with about 40% development, you're not going to find these bats anymore. So impervious surfaces, meaning pavement, cement, that kind of stuff. So as the development is coming further and further east from way out there, as people are cementing down meadows and parks, you're losing the opportunity of these bats living. And the high intensity or the low intensity, which is just general your houses and your backyards, you can have up to 80 to 100% and still be finding low numbers of these bats. So it's telling us a lot. And this is a very curious little heat map that's telling us the activity of the bats. So as you can see, way out here on Shelter Island and as well as Montauk, this is going to be our highest activity areas of northern long-eared bats. And that's kind of where we're focusing, as well as a little bit here in Barcelona Neck. And this is just looking at the activity of the bats, similar to the heat map, but just broken down into the different summers for you guys. So you can see, once again, big circles all the way up. But you'll be surprised to see that we do have some large circles here in the center of the island. And you can almost match it up of like Caleb Smith Park, these kind of big areas that are preserved. You'll see these huge population kind of jumps there. And another thing I want to point out is if you look, you can see as we get to the fall, these circles get much larger out east, and that's telling us that these bats are moving east on the island as it gets to the later part of the season, which tells us where to focus our research as we're looking into hibernation. So we net in the spring and the fall here, and we're trying to find bats right before they go into hibernation and right before they come out. So as I mentioned, we're doing a lot of stuff out here, Montauk, the Springs area, as well as Shelter Island, but we have netted over at Rocky Point, right down the road from here, and we've caught northerns in all these locations. And this is just kind of breaking down all the work that we've done since 2017, and how many bats we've been able to capture and tag, which last year was a little bit less successful, which is kind of heartbreaking for us, but we're still going strong. And this is a nice little northern in a net for you guys, which is the most exciting thing in the world to see when you're out netting. And this is our work this past fall. I know I'd spoken to some people who were curious about what kind of trees they're using to hibernate in. And so there isn't a specific species or a type of tree that they prefer more than another, but you'll get them in these dead snags way up high. We found this tree is tiny. As you can see, I could fit my hand around it, and this bat is hibernating roosting right there for it. And we also were trying to check them out and see these guys. So this is one of our bats in the tree. We were able to get a photo of him with his little transmitter on his back that we were tracking in via. And then these are the bats that we're able to track last year. I think these slides were in it last year, so you may have seen these before, but I want to throw them in again. And so the huge novel part of all this research that we're doing is this bat is a hibernating cave bat. Upstate, you'll find them in caves throughout its entire range. It sleeps underground in caves. But here, we're finding that it's actually hibernating in a crawl space underground. So this is from the Springs area, and a huge part of our research, why we're tracking, is to locate these hibernation sites, because this is completely novel to us, and identify them, characterize them, and see if this is contributing to this bat's ability to survive white nose when they're pretty much dying out, 90% reduction throughout its entire range. And so we actually went to that crawl space. We have an acoustic detector within it, and we're able to track the bat throughout the winter, seeing how often it's waking up. And this is much more frequent than we're seeing in bats and caves upstate. Usually it's about 2 to 3 weeks a bat will wake up from hibernation just to kind of restart its immune system. They dehydrate a little bit, so they need to drink some water. And this, on average, we're finding every 5 days, which is, once again, novel behavior for this. This we kind of broke down the temperature that we're actually seeing the bats out in the landscape. So we were tracking them at Barcelona Neck, which is one of our first sites. And you're able to see that this red line here is 4 degrees Celsius, which kind of comes into play with the insect studies that we're doing now. We're setting 4 to 5 degrees as the minimum temperature that a lot of the moths that live in the winter and fall will actually be out flying at. And as you can see, there's a number of nights where these bats are out on the landscape, not just by their hibernation site, but out at Barcelona Neck, one of their favorite summer sites, and they're out on the landscape, possibly feeding. So our idea is these bats only have enough energy going into hibernation to survive waking up every 2 to 3 weeks. So all of a sudden, now they're waking up every 5 days. And these bats are surviving white nose. They're waking up more often. Their immune functions are working a little bit better. So maybe it has to do with their diet. Maybe that's something that's involved with how they're surviving. So my specific research is on northern long-eared bats' diets, specifically during the fall, winter, and spring, seeing what they're eating, what's out there, and if that's what's enabling them to wake up more often and help them to survive this infection. So in general, they're moth strategists. They eat Lepidoptera, which is essentially butterflies and moths. There's a large number of actual moths that do come out in the fall and the winter time. They do eat beetles, flies, and the like, a lot less frequently. And I know a lot of people always ask about mosquitoes, so I wanted to throw this up there. Bats do eat mosquitoes, very small numbers. If you think about it in the sense of a moth is a giant bowl stir fry, and a mosquito is a tiny piece of rice, you're always going to eat the stir fry instead of eating individual grains of rice. A lot more nutrients, protein in there for you. So they will eat them. It is part of their diet. Don't be turned off from that, but definitely moths more. And the feeding strategies of the northern is actually what makes it very curious, because many bats do feed on the wing. As you can imagine, they fly along, they see the insect, the echolocation helps them to locate it within the air, and they feed while they're flying. But northern long-eared bats, as well as the little browns that you've kind of heard about a lot probably in your life, they both can also glean off vegetation. So they can pick off insects that are sitting on tree trunks or branches that are not moving, which especially is helpful in the wintertime when a lot of these insects can only fly at certain temperatures, but they still might be on the landscape until the sun hits them and they warm up enough. So looking into just some potential prey that we have out here, and if you guys happen to recognize things, feel free to contact me or email me. I love hearing about this. There's an invasive winter moth species that's been around since the 90s, and it's actually, if you can see over here, we do have it on Long Island, and there hasn't really been much work done to kind of prevent an outbreak, which they've had huge outbreaks in Massachusetts. But what's interesting about most of these species is that the females can't fly. What they do is they climb up a tree trunk, and they sit there and wait for the male to come find them by smelling their pheromones. So this is the perfect kind of sitting duck for these northern long-eared bats. If I can find that this is in their diet, it seems like the perfect situation for them. And with the adults active October to February, it's right in the prime time where these bats are waking up from hibernation, and they're starving because they don't have enough body fat to survive waking up as frequently as they now are. There's some other species, cankerworms. These are all kind of geometrid moths. They're winter moths. They're out at nighttime, and most of them are attracted to sugar or black lights. So my whole study is to do an insect survey along the winter time. So I set up a kind of a pilot study this year with a bunch of volunteers, citizen science outreach. We have light traps with UV light, as well as bait traps with a kind of nice wine, banana, brown sugar mixture. Leaving those out overnight when the minimum temperature is around 41 degrees Fahrenheit, which kind of meets the 5 degrees Celsius minimum for these insects. We have had some issues with raccoons, who apparently really like wine, down here on the Forks, who knew? So a lot of this is kind of troubleshooting, figuring out how to make this easier for us. And then the volunteers are pinning the insects for us, and I'm working with an entomologist up at the New York State Museum to identify all the species, to kind of create these windows of when different prey are active. And it's tough with insects because they do vary so much throughout the year, when they're out and when they're not. But the whole idea is to really create a simple key for these volunteers to be able to use, so they don't have to pin every single moth they see, because I don't want to take all the moths that are out there. So I'm hoping to create a key of what the common species are to make it easier next year, this upcoming winter, so we can really get a nice idea of what's out there. And then I'm also doing guano surveys. So this is black gold. This is like what I dream about, is collecting this stuff. I have little big brown guano and little brown bat guano, which is stuff that you might see in your attics, because the big brown bats are going to be the attic dwellers that you get. We're looking for these nice crawl space dwellers, which are kind of this new exciting thing, the northern long-eared, but their guano would be similar in size to this. And I'm doing collections while we're netting in the spring and the fall, as well as in the one hibernation site we have, we are trying to collect guano from within there, which fortunately for me, it's cold down there, which means the guano lasts a really nice long time, so I don't have to be crawling around all that often. But I just love poop, you know? I just wanted you guys to see what I like, you know? And I'm hoping that by reaching out to you guys, maybe we can find some more hibernation sites so I can get some more poop that I love so much. I'm going to use this guano, and I'm doing a fecal analysis on that, and what we're going to do is hopefully pair what species make up the guano of these bats in the wintertime to what's out on the landscape, so I can prove that they are feeding during the wintertime here on the landscape. So that is the whole goal. That's what we're doing right now. That's where we are and where we're coming from. In here, on this slide, we have, if you live out on the East End, I have a survey that I've created that kind of, you can describe your crawl space for us. We kind of know what we're trying to characterize, but we do know somewhat what crawl spaces these bats would prefer, and we would love to maybe get out to your crawl space next fall and check it out and crawl around and look for poop and bats and all these kind of things. And it's usually me, so it's me that'll be crawling around there. So feel free to take a picture of this slide. If you want to get involved either with the bug surveys, we do a lot of netting, so we can always use volunteers. I know it's a lot of fun to get out there and actually see bats. So we can always welcome people out there. Feel free to contact me. I have my student email as well as my New York State email on there. And if you guys want to talk to me after, I feel like I don't have time at all. So any questions, come find me after. And thank you to everyone who's been involved.